My name is Rafi Finegold. I'm CEO and founder of Handily, and we are a platform that allows homeowners to video chat with home improvement pros on demand.
I'm Gardner with _VC. I'm a general partner there, and we're a pre-seed and seed venture capital firm based right here in Boston.
My name is Prithvi Tanwar. I'm a partner at Polsinelli. It's a big national law firm.
The early part is messy, right? You're talking to people, you're like, is this something? There's a line from Jerry Seinfeld, comedians evidently always say, you think this is anything? You're like, is this something? You're talking to people, you're validating the idea. There was a point where I was like, I'm gonna build kind of a prototype and put this out there. And it was right around that time that I was like, yeah, I think I need to figure out how to actually handle company formation. I ended up getting a recommendation from an accountant to a lawyer who helped me. And he was like, listen, I think you can do an LLC to start, super simple. When you want to start raising money, you're definitely going to want not an LLC. That was, kind of that decision I made because I'm very much lean startup minded. So I'm like, right, pace of, I'm not like waiting weeks, I'm like hours, days. I can start an LLC, create an LLC now very quickly, very cheaply, very light. And then the confidence that I was given was, yeah, you can convert this to C Corp or whatever when you need to, so that when you want to raise money, distribute equity, et cetera, it's much easier. And so that's where things stand right now. And as I'm sort of seeing traction in the market and thinking about raising money, this is that moment where I'm like, I think it's getting close to the time where I need to go do something like that.
I'm a former founder as well, and there's a couple milestones, right, where you need to do something company-wise. One's when you start getting paid, right, and you probably don't want to, pay personal taxes on it, and so you want to do something. And then the other, of course, is when you raise money. I've always thought you just go. If you're ever going to raise money, if you think you're going to be a venture-backed startup, you should just go straight to a C Corp. It's not that hard. That's how I've thought about it.
I take a very practical-minded approach to this. I think that the advice you got, thinking about setting up an entity really comes from two places, right? It comes from creating like a liability shield for you. And a lot of the times when I'm talking to founders, one of the first questions I ask is, are you working with someone else? And if you're working with someone else, then yes, I think you need to set up an entity because all of a sudden it gets messy. If it's just you in your garage, okay, fine, it can take a little longer. If you're working with third parties out there, that's where you need another liability shield as well. All right, so two aspects. If you're kind of creating IP, how do you basically divvy up that IP amongst people? Number one. And then number two, if you're dealing with the outside world, how do you make sure that if something goes wrong, your car and house, right, aren't at risk? Like Chris, I go straight to the Delaware C Corp, right? I'm like, why are we messing around? Go straight to it. Having a pass-through entity, and this is me kind of getting nerdy here, but allows you to do some interesting things if you have other sources of income, right? You get to write off losses against other sources of income. That's a technical reason why you would have an LLC, especially if you have a product company that's going to go out and raise venture capital financing early on. But it's a tax hedge, and I tell founders straight up, like, dude, you're not doing this to do tax accounting. You're doing this to start a company. So go do it right the first time around. Look, you got one aspect of that problem sorted, which is awesome. You got that liability shield. As you start to talk about money, you certainly want to convert. There are some kind of hidden, ditches, I call them, in terms of if you go out there and start raising capital in the form of notes and debt, and then when you go to convert, it could actually hit you personally from a tax perspective. So just be aware of it, right? Just understand the landscape. Setting up an LLC for one individual is the simplest thing in the world, right? You hit a button on LegalZoom and bang, you got an LLC, right? The reason why it's not necessarily the smartest thing to do is as you grow the company, as you add more members, as you add more stakeholders, an LLC being a creature of contract, right? Everything about the LLC, it basically is spelled out in the operating agreement, right? That's the contract that kind of runs these companies. It needs to change. So it goes from being incredibly simple to being incredibly, complicated very, very quickly. And it isn't a good operational model when it comes to a company that's going to have a malleable equity base. And what I mean by that is, shareholders are going to come and go. You're going to use equity to incentivize people. You're going to have investors. Like very, very quickly, that LLC operating agreement is going to basically just get way too complicated, even for lawyers, right? I mean, like I get asked a question, I got to go look at a 40-page agreement and put my magnifying glasses on. It's kind of silly. It's not a smart way to run a company. Corporations seem a little scarier initially, but they're a creature of statute, right? Like Delaware corporate law basically dictates how things run. Maybe you spend a little more time setting it up, but then it's set up. It's like set up like a machine, right? That you can kind of bolt on parts to as you grow. That's my non-legalistic response to that question.
I think I'd throw one more, grenade into the room in this conversation. And as an investor, when we look at a company, and this is aside from the legal construct of the entity, one of the things we always want to understand is how founders have structured equity and how they've divided it amongst each other and the agreements therein. That's one of the tricky aspects too. I don't know, Prithvi, if you have some thoughts on kind of best practices there too.
Oh yeah. So look, even before I go there, I think some investors won't even invest in pass-through entities for tax reasons. All right. But yeah, absolutely. Like knowing how the founding team has distributed equity amongst themselves is a topic of discussion. Knowing that they're savvy enough to protect themselves through, things like vesting, reverse vesting, what's the equity split? I love founders when they show up and say, "Oh, we're gonna split it 3 ways, or we're gonna split it 4 ways." And I always go, "Well, that's a very convenient answer. It's almost never the right answer because somebody's got to call the shots early on, and voting control turns into operational control, turns into how do you settle disputes? Because guess what? I think one of the biggest risks that early stage companies face in the first 12 to 24 months of its existence is not external. It comes from the team. And not because people are bad people, it's just because life happens, and you need to be able to account for it.
Yeah, we say that all the time. It's the second leading cause of death for a startup next to running out of money is some sort of founder conflict over equity splits.
Oh yeah. And you're going to have a founder conflict before you have money. I guarantee it.
Yep.
When you think about a startup, especially very early days, maybe pre-raising money, how do you typically think about, like, how should that startup think about the costs associated with all the with legal fees?
So you're asking specifically around cost, but I'll kind of give you a broader answer. I think there are practices and firms that focus on the representation of early and growth stage companies. And if you really think about it, like again, I'll be very transparent, right? What's the business model, if you will? Like lawyers like me, practices like mine, we really want to represent the next the next wave of Ubers and Airbnbs, right, if you will. And one way to do it is just wait until you're a behemoth and then try to basically pitch you for business. Another more rewarding and actually more fun way to do it is to work with you during the early stages when you can't necessarily afford us, but you need sophisticated but targeted guidance, right? So there are lawyers out there, there are practices out there that will find a way to work with early stage companies like you and do it on a capped fee basis, do it on a deferral basis. I think the trick for you, Rafi, is to find counsel that you can kind of click with. It is a fit issue, and it's going to be an important relationship for you and the company going forward. And then always keep in mind, right? It's people kind of freak out about legal bills all the time. That's a factor of rates, but it's also a factor of time spent. So if you can find somebody that you're like, okay, this person's not going to do a bunch of work that's not necessary, given the stage and life cycle of the company, then that situation kind of fixes itself, right? And look, another mechanism I often see is, I'll do self-help in the beginning and then I'll transition over, or I'll work with a small firm I'll work with a solo, lawyer initially, and then once I'm ready to raise, then I'll transition. Again, I'll go back to that same, Chris's point and what I agree with. Just go straight. Go. Why don't you just work with the people who you're going to work with, right? Instead of, because these transitions take time, they're full of risk, and they're full of drama, right? And there's stress. You've got enough stress in your life.
Good counsel is money well spent, even in the early days. I'm a big believer in that.